Thank you. Now, I seem to be switched on, which is good news. I would almost certainly be losing my voice between now and the next 30 minutes, which gives me the opportunity to do this for the first time using sign language, which I'm sure is going to be highly entertaining for all of you. I'm probably going to do something to the presentation. Just to put it full screen. Now, I am acutely aware that if you look ahead, you see dinner, which means that I stand between a hungry and expectant human being and his resource of pleasure and satisfaction, which is not a position anybody should ever wish to be in. They are not amicable beasts when they are in that particular condition. So I'll try and glide through the future as quickly as I can in order that I can coast home safely and possibly with all of my voice still with me. I guess that as you look ahead, what you're really doing is you're peeping into the future, hoping that you might get some sense of what's over there. And just to frustrate you even more, as I'm doing by keeping you from dinner, let me assure you, I have absolutely no knowledge as to what's over there. What I can do, and what I will try and share with you, is am I too strong? Because I can hear myself. Okay. What I can do about the future is make a few comments, problematize it, and probably share with you what we have fairly successfully done across time and that we've neglected doing in recent times. The future is definitely a problem. It's a very, very big problem. It's a problem we've had from day one. We just don't know it. And that is so true and so damning that we do our best to forget it. We remove it like a noxious fly. But the truth is, we just don't know it. And in fact, there couldn't be anything truer than that. We can only know that which has happened. And if there is one thing for sure about the future, it has not happened. I guess many of you work with businesses. I am amazed by the extent to which there is a collective assumption that the future beams some data back to you. And that if only you can collect that data and assemble it in a rational way, it will make sense and you'll be ahead of the others. Well, that's really absolutely not true. The future does not beam data back to us. Now, I have just recently learned something fascinating about sign language. I'm preparing myself to the day when I will really have to do that. And what I learned is that in Western cultures, when you signify the future in sign language, you signify ahead. But that's not the case, that's not the convention in Africa, where in fact you signify behind you, which of course makes perfect sense. That is what collectively we seem obsessed with doing. Look behind you, see the sedimented amount of data that that past has produced, and assume that somewhere there is an indication of what's going to happen next. It worked. It worked amazingly well for us for a significant period of time. From the day we came off the trees and into the savannah, actually that worked well. Because our experience had sedimented in us individually and socially a sense of what the world would look like based on that experience, which allowed us to be effective, anticipate it to that extent. But of course, something is happening to the world that's making that highly inefficient, in fact, highly misleading. A good way that I can think of in terms of describing the future is it's random. What's random about it is the fact that it is something about the present which is constantly evolving. and by the way, that's not my invention. I've mutuated that from a sociologist, a woman in Austria, Helga Novotny, who's been working on the individual and social experience of time, and by the way, alerting societies, decision makers, scientific colleagues, time is changing, structurally changing in our experiences. That, to some extent, allows us to begin to formulate ways in which we can think of the future that might be just a little bit more efficient than simply saying it's what happened yesterday, linearly pushed forward. And to think of it as an extended present in which the possible is expanding exponentially. Now that's very interesting as far as I'm concerned, because it means it actually gives you, if you can think of it in those terms, that volume of possibilities. And that is what you need to manage and arrange within your activity. And the fact that the future is an infinite range of possibilities is one way of saying something about the future. You can be much more simple, much more effective, much more clever than anything like that, and say that the future is stupid. And this is Jenny Holzer, a contemporary American artist, conceptual artist. Now, as artists are wont to be, not only does she say something which is remarkably intelligent about the future, she says something which is remarkably true about the future and most specifically our position with respect to the future. Stupid comes from the Latin stupor, which means blindness. And that is exactly the position that we have with respect to the future. Now, I hope you recognize, if you believe me, that if any of that is true, we really do have a big problem. How can you take decisions individually or collectively if that is the case? You can, and we've done a lot of that, pretend that the problem does not exist, or you can assume that the problem is there and it's a really big problem, and you have to do something with that. I thought I should give you the example of what a small Babylonese community was doing some 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. This is a ritual mask, and it's actually one of the rarest representations of the future. So what you're looking into is their representation of the future. And what's extraordinary about that image is the complexity of meaning that you can derive from it. If you look at it carefully, it has highly emphasized sensory elements. So big eyes, big nose, big ears, big mouth. It takes stuff in. And of course, we would assume, well, that's fairly natural. It's an elementary level of accumulation of data and knowledge. But then the face is made of something which is highly intriguing, because that system of lines is actually the entrails, a processing system where the data gets separated, the little which is good kept, and all of the rest left to enrich other things. That alone would be a remarkable representation of what we do with respect to the future, for what's represented there is a system of interpretation. But what is truly fascinating about that image is the way it was used. For that was a ritual mask, and it was worn by the leader of that community to go into the community and tell the story of a future. And that, of course, has been, and most likely will carry on being, the fundamental human skill that we have with respect to the future, to tell a robust story about what it is. I don't know if any of you has been in Australia and if you've had any contact with the Aboriginal communities over there. They have an absolutely fascinating culture. And one of the things that's most fascinating about that is that you learn from them that the world is actually created by their stories, to such an extent that they recognize every single element of that world in terms of one of their narratives, which, by the way, has meant that even today they're way more efficient in crossing what is an immense land, highly inhospitable, way more effectively than anybody else because of their own narratives. They sing as they cross the land, and they actually create the land. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring this to you is to remind you, I'm not sure that reminding you is the correct word, to argue that telling a robust story about the future is the only thing you can do. And you should accept it, stay in that position, uncomfortable though it might make you feel. I'm telling a story here, and reflect on the fact that there is absolutely no chance that your story is going to be right. In fact, it's the total reverse. You have 100% probability that your story is not going to turn out to be the future. It's probably the only certain thing about the future. You'll never be in that position. That leads us to one breakthrough in intellectual history, at least in economic history, which was Markowitz. Confronted with uncertainty, make sure that you have a good spread that will cover your risk of being in the wrong position. Assume consistently that with respect to the future, you're in the wrong position. And spread out your stories. Make sure that your spread is your element of resilience, that your spread captures those things about the future which are surprising, disruptive, improbable, because that is what's going to give you resilience with respect to the status of the future. To sum up, what is just a conceptual hat as to where I stand with respect to the future, so that you know where I'm coming from. Well, the future is that problem. We know absolutely nothing about it. There is something that we can do, in fact, two things. And if done well, they provide amazing resilience with respect to that problem. We can tell a robust story about it, and robust is a very good metaphor to use in this case. I wish I had time to qualify it for you, but I don't. But what that does is it helps us conceptualize the problem. It delivers to us that most fundamental human capability, conceptualizing the problem. And once we are there, accept that we are never right, and that therefore the best thing we can do with that is have a good portfolio of robust stories about it. And I thought I should just give you one practical example. I'm sure that, especially for those of you who are teaching in business school, you know, the single case is one of the standards. Well, this is one single case of a community of decision makers who has done precisely that. They have built for themselves robust stories, and they've arranged them in a portfolio. In this case, is 16 stories about the future. The relevance of that image is to say the decision-making activity is about going into that universe of possibilities and measuring the robustness of your decision with respect to a system of alternative possibilities. And there isn't a single individual that goes into that box who can usefully think in terms of probability. The futures that matter there are the futures that are less probable and more likely to fundamentally disrupt a market, in their case, a financial market. Okay, so I've given you my conceptual heading, I've given you a practical case, and at this point I feel that you have enough information for me to go ahead, but tell you my story about the future. In fact, about futures, for at this point you will agree there isn't one. There's infinite possible futures, and my intent is merely to scan a few that can possibly be relevant to what you do or aim to do in the future. And I guess as I hope most of us, I'm obsessed with my future. And in this case, I would say, I'm beginning to have a sense that I'm really very close to knowing something about my future which I really didn't know I could get. But it's unfortunately really, 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 really specifically, uniquely, exclusively about me. On the other hand, that I should be in that position may be opening up to things that are going to happen in the future. If you haven't recognized it, that is my genetic profile. So that's my mother's haplogroup, that's my father's haplogroup, and the combination of those two produced me. What that gives me, though, is access to information about my future. It tells me something about my past, which is very anecdotal and quite colorful, but frankly relevant to the future. It gives me access to information about my future, which is unique to me, is extremely deep, and I have yet to learn how to use it. But one thing which I am measuring is the extent to which it changes the relationship of anyone who, given that information, has to provide me with a service or a product, be it a doctor, an insurer, or in my case, an oculist, since one of the things that I seem I will have in the future is age-related macular degeneration. Genetics is going to significantly change our relationship with ourselves, and those redrawn selves, we will have information about us which we have just never had to that level of depth and precision. Is simply one of the many places where it is clear that we already are redrawing the boundaries of what it means to be a human being. And I'm going to go a little bit in there. I'm aware that usually when I do, people begin to be a little bit hazy. It's mostly because you think you don't want to go there. And I will try and make the case that maybe actually we all collectively really want to go there. I know that this doesn't look convincing. You might think, well, I'm not sure that that's really where I want to go. And admittedly, just now, that is the one thing that we're doing for sure, for we are extending quite significantly that particular paradigm of life, which is old age. We are pushing death further and further away from us. Unfortunately, all that gains us, for the time being, is just more of a space in life where we don't particularly wish to be. On the other hand, we're doing it. We'll keep doing it. We'll perfect the capability of being there, and we will have to redraw social systems, senses of self, relationships between families and individuals in order to accommodate for the fact that that is happening, and almost certainly will be happening to a greater extent in the future. Now, it does happen to me sometimes to work in context where the assumption that tweaking with the paradigm of mankind is going to be, and possibly already is, so effective that that element that defines who we are, mortality, is going to be pushed so far into the future as to actually redefine humanity. If you're not mortal, or if you do not experience that particular transition as we have defined it up to now, well, something pretty colossal is happening to our condition. Let me reassure you, it's improbable. Not because we won't be able to do that, but because we will almost certainly not wish to go there. And by the way, there are very significant stakeholders in society for whom it is important that that particular paradigm should not be altered. And I'll leave it to you to work out whose business model depends on mankind's mortality. Claudia Mitchell, on the other hand, opens, I think, a completely different view about what it means to tweak with those borderlines of humanity. Claudia Mitchell is a young lady, colored, of Hispanic origin, I imagine, worked in a supermarket, young, recently fiancéed, had a bad accident, lost the shoulder and the arm. A remarkable convergence of technological capability through different parts of the world and different disciplines and different geniuses out there actually provided her with this mechanic implant that substituted the arm. And I was looking at the webcast of the press conference that was given where she was interviewed about this. And I could see that there was something amazing, which was joy, and also a high level of frustration as the questions were being asked, which were, obvious but a little bit pedantic. Can you show us how you drink? Can you write? Can you shake hands? And, there were hoo-ah to this marvel of human ingenuity that sort of got a mechanical arm there. And in the end, her joy just broke through their frustration, and she volunteered the information. I can feel with this, which of course opened up to me the sense of a mother and a lover who through that now had full sense of self. And she taught me the lesson, of course we will go there, because of course it will make us happier. And we will want that. And we'll do anything we can to be there. And of course, it does bring up the problem for us of working on that paradox. Who do we think we are? How much of our biological origin needs to be there for us to say, I am a human being? And we are, let me assure you, amazingly lazy and conservative in thinking about that. But that's going to come to an end. And if you want to know where is the push going to be, all you have to do is look at teenagers and realize the extent to which their behaviors, which are beginning to actually be reflected in the shape of their brains, is fundamentally different from ours. And if you look carefully at their conversation, at their social practices, at the things that they do and they think, you will see that for them, it is natural to think that being human is being connected elsewhere. And that, of course, breaks down one barrier, the sense of the individual as a whole. And as you go in that, you can begin to think of a connected mankind, a networked mankind. And I don't know whether you'll consider it scary or not, but certainly there's one of my clients who's working on that paradigm. What can we do to connect individuals? And unfortunately, I guess for us and for the future of mankind, that kind of quest and inquiry always seems to be somehow related to war. Now, just in case you thought that I was derailing a little bit, I thought I'd take you back in time. Keynes has been coming up frequently of late because of recent events in the financial markets. And I thought I should have my share of Keynes as well. But I'm going to shift slightly from classical Keynes to an essay that Keynes wrote in 1930, the last of a series of collected short essays which he called Essays in Persuasion. He wanted to persuade the world about something which he felt needed to be done. 1929 had just recently occurred. In the very last essay of that collection, he writes to his grandchildren and represents to them what the world will look like 100 years from then, which of course brings us to 2030. And I don't know about you, but I certainly plan to be there. And check it out. see just how right Keynes was in representing the world. Keynes has something remarkable to say about what's going to happen then. He says, we will have removed from ourselves what he calls the economic problem. Basic access to resources for satisfying basic needs. He says that's going to be gone. And at the beginning of this year, a very rich group of economists was asked to comment, was he right or was he wrong? Slightly in advance of time, by the way. We're only 2010, so he's got another 20 years to see whether he's right or not. And they all said that he was wrong. Quite clearly, if you look around, that thing just hasn't happened. And it's hard to disagree with them. On the other hand, there is an amazing coincidence between Keynes's own sense of where the world would be in 2030, his arguments as to what would make the world go there by 2030, which was the combination of the force of compound interest on capital, can you believe it, and technological advancements, which he assumed would follow a power law. And that reasoning is remarkably similar to the reasoning that scientists today believe to be the foundations of what they call the singularity. That point at which technological evolution will have spiked up so much that we reach a point where computational capability is far superior to that of mankind. And by the way, there's consensus there that 2030 is the year when this may possibly happen. And if you have some interest in checking out that particular convergence of stories, look up the Singularity University that has two remarkable founders. One is Google, they're ubiquitous, a little bit everywhere, and the other one is the NASA. By the way, the third is a company called 23andMe, and it was 23andMe that gave me my genetic profile. And by the way, if you wish to be astonished, that company was a startup in 2009, founded by two women, which of course is insight into the future of business, and those two women are the two wives of the two founders of Google. You're beginning to see amazing convergences and pushes in strange directions. I thought Keynes would be a good setup for us to reflect on the fact that wherever we look in terms of going ahead, there seem to be scales of problems which simply require different structures with which to address them and solve them. And I would say the most recent one, and the one that's probably made the point, is crisis in the financial markets. That was a system of global dimensions. We were lucky because 3 or 4 individuals who knew each other well were prepared to have the conversations that it needed for them to coordinate their activity, agree upon what needed to be done, and do it on a more or less global scale so that the problem could be resisted. But they are the first ones to tell us and the policymakers that was a stroke of luck, and you don't want to depend on that in the future. By the way, they were informally gathered at the time in something which was called the Financial Stability Forum, and they have now surreptitiously changed the name of that institution into the Financial Stability Board. And I don't know what your experience of boards is, but in they tend to take decisions and set agendas. But clearly, because they know that the problem that they are being asked to resolve can only be resolved at the level of a global governance. And if there is one other element of pressure in the context out there that's going to push us in that direction, is clearly this one. Now, climate change was there before the meltdown of financial markets. And I certainly remember having conversations with people who were concerned with this, who were saying we need a system of global governance to tackle this problem. And of course, I guess you all know how much of a failure conversations around that problem has been, the remarkable lesson from the future is sometimes obliquity pays more. And I actually remember saying to them, why don't you take some other part of the world and begin to build a model of global governance there, which proves to be effective, and then shift it to what this massive thing seems to demand. Well, amazingly, we've come full circle, because actually when you go now into that problem, some of the stakeholders there are beginning to say, hey, in finance, they seem to be coordinating at least their activities rather effectively. Whatever they do now, the problem for them will be, can we think of a system of global governance which is acceptable to our current condition and that will address a problem that's likely to come to us from the future? So this just makes the point that I have. There are scales of there are scales of problems out there that require global systemic tools with which to address them. We can deny that to ourselves. It won't be an effective management of that issue. The question really is, do we have the capability of come up with a design that is going to satisfy the complexity of our present world? And that definitely demands capability. Demands a pervasive and persuasive global leadership mindset. And if there is one task that I would give to educational institution is, can you make those people? Can you contribute to the solution of the problem by churning individuals who actually have that ability? And of course, the question is not the ability to think of the world as one, because that's simple, simplistic, and not necessary, frankly. But to really think of the world in terms of its multiplicity, and what is it that can keep it together as a single unit. I hope that what I've represented so far to you gives you a sense, well, it's complex. And I think complexity has got to be the one key word for anybody who's got to go out there and do something. Not to suffer it. Not to say, well, it's complex, so how about I do a small thing? But in terms of developing the skills that allow you to address complexity, live with it, make it part of who you are, live constantly and happily with complexity. By the way, that's a representation of complexity, which is the butterfly effect, the Lorentz aggregator, whatever you want to call it. But what's most useful about it is that it suddenly represents to you that there always is somewhere a conceptual, structural simplicity that we can bring to complexity to understand it. And having that capability is a remarkable skill and definitely one that the future demands in terms of addressing the problem that it's going to deliver to us. As we look ahead in terms of decision-making, management, leadership, I would say two fundamental qualities are required, and one would hope that educational institutions can address them and develop the individuals that have them. One, the capacity to fully understand a self, an identity, and then the place of that with respect to a wider context, and generate the levels of coherence that requires. I have heard, and I was pleased to hear that there's been a sense of we need to work with meaning. Please do. It's high time that business starts working with meaning. It's an essential thing. I come from a discipline in philosophy which is called hermeneutics, which I doubt anyone in this room probably has heard of, which is the study of meaning. And let me assure you, it's the most complex discipline that I've had to travel through. In fact, I traveled out of it. It was so complex. But if you want to go there, please do, because that is definitely a necessary capability to understand what meaning is how social systems generate it, how it gets interpreted, how it makes things happen. For sure, that is a space you want to be in. Managing that is an essential part of leadership. And I'm now coming to a close, and I thought I should close with the words of Keynes in 1929, for he was himself looking ahead, and you asked me to look ahead, and I can think of no better word as a mandate for anyone than his own. There is no reason why we should not feel ourselves free. For one of the things of thinking of the future as an infinite range of possibilities is that it frees the individual. You can really go out there and try that infinite range of possibilities. To be bold, to be open, to experiment, to take action, to try the possibility of things. To produce individuals or to support the development of individuals who have the capability of going out there and boldly try the possibility of, like it to be, a mandate of educational institutions. I have traveled across the world through many research and educational institutions. I have yet to come across one that does so full-heartedly. So I hope, you'll call me in and say, well, I'm that one, and I'll be happy to visit you if you are. The people that you want to churn are not business engineers. Please, basta. You really want to bring out of your institutions those individuals that will take on that range of infinite possibilities and will be happy by the fact that they have to manage that level of complexity. And they will be happy because you will have given them the conceptual means with which to do that. And if you can, that can change the world or a business organization. In fact, I would say if there's one thing that you really want to do is learn and teach to be a trans. And by that, I mean, in case you had any doubts about that, trans in terms of the capability of moving across things, experiences, ages, genders, disciplines, knowledge. For that is what effective management will require in any future that I see ahead of me. And building that capability is no mean challenge. We won't get rid of the fact that that's our problem. That is what the future is, and whatever our capabilities, it will stay that way. We can, of course, with some tools, pretty fundamental, carry on doing the only thing that we can with respect to the future, which is frame, reframe, and frame again. And that's it.